A couple of weeks ago, the European Union Commission in Pakistan, they shared a very interesting tweet. Very interesting, very encouraging. I was ebullient. I was glad when I read that. So it was that for fourth consecutive year, Pakistani students have secured the most Erasmus Mundus scholarship in the European Union.
Yes.
Outcompeting India, outcompeting Bangladesh, outcompeting Mexico and other countries from the global south. I was very excited. So like that was something that offered personally to me a glimmer of hope. And I was like, sure, yeah, we also do have a lot of potential and talent. It's only we need to harbor it. Of course, the responsibility lies also on policymakers, but also on us, what we can do in our own capacity. But at the same time, it was followed by a very depressing thought, which is that I don't think so many of these young scholars will return back. Now, don't get me wrong, those are very important roles, right? We need civil servants. We, of course, need military officers and soldiers. We, of course, need people working in other departments of the government. But from a societal point of view, from a cultural point of view, it does. And in fact, there was a study in Pride as well, said that this attitude of colonial hangover that is shrinking the room for the creative class. Right now, so Raghsab, in United States, of course, we've been here. I've been living here for quite some time. We have heard about something called the American Dream. What is the American Dream? Typically, as it is portrayed in movies, okay, you come broke, you have very little money, you come to United States, you work very hard, you get a job, you get some training, invest your money somewhere, you try to start a business, and then if you're extremely successful, you try to become someone like Elon Musk or Jeffrey Bezos. What I say, the Pakistani dream is basically just to get a 17-skill job and then
Hello and welcome to the Economic Angle with Dr. Usman Chohan. Today I have the pleasure of having somebody very dear to me on the show, soon to be Dr. Hassan Mujtaba, who was a researcher under me at CAS, a very bright man, did amazing research and then went to his dream school, UMass, और वहाँ पे भी बहुत, as we colloquially say, game डाल रहा है. So mashallah, I'm very, very personally proud of him, and I think it's time for me to learn from him more than he can teach me. I would like to, get something from him at this occasion. And us as an audience, we can gain from Hassan Mujtaba. So welcome, Hassan, to the show.
Thank you very much, Dr. Osman. It's been an honor and pleasure, and that was a very humbling introduction for me. I try my level best to live up to the expectations.
Yeah, you always have, mashallah, and you always will, I'm sure. So, Hassan, today's topic that we want to cover is about the brain drain. You are exemplifying this by being in America and doing well there, but you have deep ties to Pakistan and you want to serve Pakistan, so you embody it personally. But it's a bigger phenomena. In fact, we are the biggest exodus now as a country. As people are going, not all of them are that smart, by the way, but काम के लोग भी जा रहे हैं. So tell us a little bit about ये पस मंजर थोड़ा सा हमें दो, इसकी अक्कासी करो.
Right. Sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Usman, for this wonderful opportunity. So, when we were talking about, to have a discussion about the brain drain, the first thing that came to my mind was that in the last 7 to 8 years, people have said a lot and written a lot, like many commentators, on this recent wave of brain drain that has taken place, like in last 7 to 8 years. And in my personal opinion, they have focused more like on the symptoms of the brain drain. That is like a very in a very recent context, and not the underlying structural causes. So my effort over here is to just briefly overview what these people commentators have been saying, and then try to come up with a discussion which could add something, a new perspective to this more uh, pernicious phenomena of brain drain. So, what has happened is that, of course, there have been a lot of internal factors. I would say we as a nation, our policymakers are responsible for that. So, for example, due to a lot of bad economic policy mismanagement, I would say we do not have an industrial policy. Our broad agricultural productivity is very low. Therefore, we at the end of the day, we suffer from a perpetual balance of payment crisis. So we have to go to IMF, World Bank, and other multilateral institutions, right? I think it's been like 23rd or 24th time we have went to IMF, and of course they impose austerity, which is very brutal. Now those are like all of the internal factors, but at the same time, in last 7 to 8 years, unfortunately, there was also the exogenous shock, what we call in economics, like the external effect of COVID. Pakistan's economy was recovering, but at the very same time, COVID struck. Thankfully, our
Mm,
government did much better, performed much better as compared to other South Asian countries. But of course, that had a toll on our economy.
mm,
Then, what I just said about agricultural productivity, unfortunately, sometimes we also have to import like some of the major crops, like wheat. So when Russia-Ukraine war started in 2002, that also had a very negative role on our economy. So I think this is like the short-term situation, the picture in which the recent wave of brain drain has taken place. And a lot of people have focused on like these issues, and correctly.
mm,
But I think in order to really understand what has been contributing in the long run, I think we need to turn to the structural issues. And the
ठीक.
structural issue number one that I have identified, in my opinion, is what I call the perverse incentive structures. Now, before I explain what that is, a couple of weeks ago, the European Union Commission in Pakistan, they shared a very interesting tweet. Very interesting, very encouraging. And I was ebullient. I was glad when I read that. So it was that for fourth consecutive year, Pakistani students have secured the most Erasmus Mundus scholarship in the European Union,
Yes, yes.
outcompeting India, outcompeting Bangladesh, outcompeting Mexico and other countries from the global south. I was very excited. So like that was something that offered personally to me a glimmer of hope, and I was like, sure, yeah, we also do have a lot of potential and talent. It's only we need to harbor it. Of
Mm,
course, the responsibility lies also on policymakers, but also on us, what we can do in our own capacities. But at the same time, it was followed by a very depressing thought, which is that I don't think so many of these young scholars will turn back. But
mm,
until and unless all of these scholarship agencies, HSC, so I'm on HSC scholarship, I have a similar sort of a situation,
mm,
Fulbright and these Erasmus Mundus and etc. They have come up with, I would say, these are sort of traps, which is scholarship bonds, which is like legal documents, which stipulate that once the scholar has completed their study, they need to come back and study. Now, of course, there is a reason for that, but I personally think this is the wrong way to motivate a person to come back and serve their country. Then I'm not talking about Pakistan. Generally, I think it is true for any country. So here I would like to quote one of my professors, Sam Bowles. He's a wonderful theorist of microeconomics. He has also penned a book, and in that book, he shares very interesting experiment that was conducted in Haifa, Israel. So what researchers did was they observed a daycare center, right? So people drop their kids, and then they have to pick up their kids at a certain time period from the daycare. So, in order to discourage people arriving late, picking their children late, the researchers imposed a penalty. So, for example, if someone was late, so someone was supposed to pick their kid at 5 p.m., but they arrived at 5:30 p.m., they would have to suppose pay a monetary penalty. Now, researchers they anticipated that, of course, this is going to reduce this phenomena of latecomers, and people would avoid being delayed. In fact, reverse happened. Number of people arriving late increased. So this is where
mm,
Sam comes up with one of his main insights. This is like generally true for economic behavior of human beings as well. And this is where he challenges this notion, the mainstream neoclassical notion of Homo economicus, that we are just utility maximizing or profit maximizing agents or robots.
mm,
Like,
mm,
no, we are human beings. And we genuinely want to do something good for our society, just for the
mm,
sake of it. He calls
mm,
it human beings possessing pro social preferences. But when there are perverse incentive structures, incentive or disincentive structures, those are going to crowd out those pro social preferences. So my argument over here is, and I think this is like one of the biggest take that at least I have come so far in this whole question of human brain drain and human capital flight, is that Pakistani diaspora, Pakistani professionals, they really do want to do something good for their country. They also want to come back. You are a very good example of that. But I think their pro-social preferences are being crowded out by some of these incentive or what I call disincentive structure. Government bonds, scholarship bonds, kind of like one thing. Other would be back-breaking taxes on Pakistani professionals. Like it appears that currently our state is punishing us for the crime of getting educated, for the
Yes.
crime of improving our human capital. I think almost half of our salary that is already like deducted in tax. Now, I think, of course, paying tax is a very patriotic thing, but we have co-authored a paper on that on Pakistan taxation conundrum. There are great segments in our society who are sitting on like billions and trillions of rupees in cash and assets. They have never, paid a penny in tax. So I think it is the responsibility lies on our on the shoulders of policymakers to come up with a policy to to fix these incentives such that everyone has a fair share of taxation, and so that this would also facilitate the our diaspora and other professionals coming back and serving the country. Now I want,
Excellent.
yeah,
Continue, please.
yeah. So I want to contrast this. So, in my personal anecdotal experience living in the United States now for like 5 years, so I have come across with a lot of my Indian colleagues, and almost, Dr. Saab, every Indian man that I have come across, they want to go back to India and serve their country. Even though many of them, in fact, all of them, at least whom I know, none of them they have any sort of scholarship bonds or any other sort of legal requirements, with the exception of some women and Indian Muslims because of the political climate over there of fascism. They do not want to go, but most Indian men. On the other
Hmm.
hand, what is so dangerous in my view, and again, this is something like my own anecdotal observation as well. It appears that our state has adopted a tacit policy of encouraging brain drain. Why?
Hmm.
Because if we have people abroad, and of course, you know how our family structures are. Most of us we live in collective family system, joint family system in Pakistan. So we have someone to take care of. So that means we would send remittance in any case. So of course that is wonderful for a balance of payment. But if indeed Pakistani state has adopted this policy, this is going to be disastrous for our long-term growth and development, especially if on the other hand, India is successfully able to attract back its human capital. So that means we would become regionally very uncompetitive in terms of science, technology, entrepreneurship, and those kind of things in the long term. And an example that comes to my mind is the state of Oklahoma, which is located north of Texas, and its city capital city Tulsa. So what they
Yes.
did in during COVID times, so they came up with a policy that anyone who's working remotely, if they relocate to Tulsa, the government of Tulsa would pay them $10,000 lump sum. So a large number of highly educated people they went over there. This policy was so successful that even Mississippi is adopting that as well. Now I understand that we are a poor country. Of course, we cannot pay people, to come back to Pakistan, or even though non-Pakistanis, if they have high human capital, we think we won't be able to pay them. But at least this just point that I was making, we could at least do something about the tax structure so that it is not backbreaking and punishing for Pakistani skilled professionals or even non-Pakistanis. If we have to become a regional competitive hub, which inshallah will become, we would also have to attract people who are from other countries but would want to work in Pakistan. So that is like my point number one, like one of the biggest structural issues that I think is causing brain drain.
Okay, so now if we take the discussion, you've talked about the deep structure, that there's disincentives, there's perverse incentives, distortionary effects, and you say that people generally talk about the symptoms instead at the
Hmm.
surface level. But let's cover that quickly. What are the
Hmm.
symptoms for the society, recipient society, and donor society? What happens?
Hmm.
क्या कहते हैं लोग जो लिख रहे हैं आजकल असरात इसके क्या हैं इसके सामाजिक परिणाम क्या हैं
Yeah. So, for example, Dr. Saab, we just talk about Pakistan, the last 7 to 8 years, we have seen high inflation, high unemployment, stagnation, what is what we call stagflation, inflation backed by high unemployment. So I think those were like the immediate factors that really caused people, especially educated people, to leave. abroad. And as far as for the recipient countries, I do like I would have covered this like in my the point that I would have raised next. But the thing is, oh, okay, so why not just cover it? So the point number two that I want to make is that I think in Pakistan, it is the hankering after the Sarkari Naukri, whether it's civil service or military service. I think that is crowding out our investments in human capital, entrepreneurship, research and development, and so on, right? And so, just briefly to answer your question before I explain this in greater detail, Western countries, on the other hand, the recipient countries, on the other hand, they highly value people who have an entrepreneurial spirit, who have high acquisitions of human capital in research, development, who are extraordinary, like professors, doctors, and so on. Right? On the other hand, in Pakistan, it is generally the perception that okay, if you have had a good education, then the Munda or Kudi is a perfect suit for civil services, specifically CSS or ISSP. And in case Khuda na Khasta they flunk, then at least get a Satyam scale ki job. Now, don't get me wrong; those are very important roles, right? We need civil servants. We of course need military officers and soldiers. We of course need uh, people working in other departments of the government. But from a societal point of view, from a cultural point of view, it does. And in fact, there was a study at PIDE as well, said that this attitude of colonial hangover that is shrinking the room for the creative class, right? Now, so Raghav, Saab, in United States, of course, you have been here. I've been living here for quite some time. Uh, we have heard about something called the American Dream. So what is the American Dream? Typically, as it is portrayed in movies, okay, you come broke, you have very little money, you come to United States, you work very hard, you get a job, you get some training, you invest your money somewhere, you try to start a business, and then if you're extremely successful, you try to become someone like Elon Musk or Jeffrey Bezos.
Mm.
But what I say, the Pakistani dream is basically just to get a 17 scale job and then remain with the government, depend
Mm.
upon the government for your livelihood, and even when you even retired pension and all of that. I mean, again, nothing against that kind of a thing, but the thing is that if that is the Pakistani dream that we are selling, that means that the best of our best would go on that route, and our space would be crowded out for entrepreneurs, scientists, doctors, people, stakeholders that are needed for a growing and functioning economy. And this is especially true in this modern 21st century knowledge economy, right?
Mm. Sure.
So, in contrast, as I said, Western countries and other advanced industrialized countries, they have arms open for to accommodate these sort of people. So I think
Fine.
this again, this is like more pernicious because it's the structural point number one can be addressed by policymakers. Okay, fix tax structure. But over here, you would need to change the psyche of people. That no, you also need to accord izzat to someone who is an entrepreneur. In fact, talking about entrepreneur, we call them names like Osedji or Bania. And so these are very negative connotations, right?
Yes.
It's not exactly positive words. So that reflects a deeper psyche, and I think that would take much more time to fix than the first point that I raised.
There might be something even harder to fix. There is survey data to show that young people in Pakistan who dream of emigrating, by and
Hmm.
large, it's the males,
Yeah,
they believe that the primary driver is economic, that's fine. But there's also another underlying commingled factor, which is freedom and dignity. And
yeah,
that they don't get that living
exactly,
here. You can
exactly.
draw the parallel with when you said about Indian Muslims. Do they have dignity there? No. Acha, the women in
Hmm.
India, do they have the same dignity or freedom as they enjoy in America? They don't. But the
Hmm.
same here. So that is what you're speaking to about the harder thing to solve, which is to
Yeah.
accord and afford freedom and dignity. How important is this in your anecdotal personal experience amongst those you have spoken to? And where do you see this in an economic perspective?
Extremely important, Roxa. Extremely important. Uh, Of course, like when I talked about Indian men, especially immigrating, of course, like they are part and the parcel of the mainstream of the Indian society, right? So they wouldn't face those structural discriminations that Indian women or Indian Muslims have to face. Similar, like, of course, there is another cultural element in Pakistan that a lot of youngsters, I think, they also are experiencing social and cultural strangulation. Like, of course, there is a very limited space for freedom of speech. There are a lot of reactionary elements as well. I mean, if you say something out of your free will, it could easily land you in danger in Pakistan. So there are those factors as well that you also like alluded to that are also contributing in our younger generation, in our highly educated people emigrating. But I think that would also like depend a lot like on the who is it that who wants to leave Pakistan and not want to come back. I think, of course, like whatever is true in the case of like Indian Muslims, like of course, if you are someone from a minority and you feel unsafe, then maybe it would be difficult for you to come back and serve the
Hmm.
country.
All right.
But I think overall, generally, because just speaking from demographic point of view, we're still like a 97, 98% Muslims. The bigger factor, I think, it's more related to the professional and economic, the underlying issues, which is that being a doctor or being a teacher or being a entrepreneur is not as flashy or as it does not contain as much prestige or izzat as being a civil servant or a military servant. So, so yeah, I think, and uh, I think it can also be easily fixed, like if we come up with certain reforms. So I think present government they are introducing something like they are aiming to reform the civil service. Those kind of reforms could work. So, for example, I was thinking, and of course, Dr. Saab, you can enlighten us better. In 1980s, there were reforms in England, in British civil service, that was called the New Public Administration. Although, of course,
Yes,
that was also a political, ideological project of neoliberalization
it
as well.
was. It
But
was.
bearing that, I think we can all agree that many of our state services are in need of major overhaul and upgradation. So we could do that by at the same time carving a way for our highly educated people in our diaspora to join the government and to serve in some way where they could also not only become part of policy making but also formulate policies for the country. So I think it would be tantamount to killing two birds with one stone. One, of course, your level of state services, their efficiency would improve. At the same time, it would also accord some measure to the foreign Pakistani professor or doctor. They could also come back and they can maybe also become a Sarkari Babu for some time, while at the same time serving their country. But
Mm.
of course, in the long run, the ideal thing would be that we convince our people that everyone who works hard, and especially these people uh, who have been called the creative class, they have a very important role in the modern economy. In the modern
Mm.
knowledge
Mm.
economy cannot function
Mm.
without their contribution. Sure, everyone has their role, but we need to accord everyone with the same status and the same respect.
I agree with you, and I think we can both agree based on this that we are both very fortunate that caste existed. You see, because caste gave us that room, gave us that freedom, gave us that dignity, and it was not a sub question of salary, but it gave us a chance to serve, feel like we are doing good for our country. If there are just a lot more castes out there, on paper there are. There's 100 think tanks in Islamabad, but in reality,
Mm,
there's only one caste that I know of, which really gave
mm,
that freedom to people who were from outside, no
mm,
connection, but then hame farogh diya. So I think we're both speaking to the same thing when we say that we're fortunate to have that. Now let me give you a counter perspective, which
mm,
you should elaborate on.
mm,
That when there's a brain drain and then people from here go abroad, they think that they go with dreams,
mm.
adventure, excitement, motivation, or at least they feel unshackled, which is very good.
Yeah.
But
Mm,
here's the crux. बाहर दूध की नहरें नहीं बहती. That when they go to the other side, they actually have to struggle. They feel miserable. They have psychological problems. They may feel some deprivation. They feel disconnected from the society whose software is deeply embedded, whether they realized it or not. How often do you see this in the diaspora that you have interacted with there? What are the economic implications of this?
Also, a wonderful, wonderful follow-up question. Of course, I would give my own example. Over here, since like last 4 or 5 years, I do miss Eids. I do miss Ashura Juluses. Right. So the biggest thing that I miss is the melodious azan and all of those things. And I was one of those people. Always considered myself more like a secular liberal kind of a person, which I am. But at the same time, there is an affinity with your culture, with your religious, with your societal values.
Hmm.
So when you are in Pakistan, you may not feel that. But when you are abroad, that I wouldn't say in cultural shock, because when I came to United States, of course, we have seen US in movies, oh, New York, San Francisco, all of that, right?
Hmm.
More than cultural shock, it's like cultural dissociation, right?
Hmm.
So this feeling of alienation, right? So that is a very harrowing feeling, and I'm lucky. So, for example, I have my wife and kid, but I've heard of cases where people have just lost it, and some students even committed suicide. So, um, in terms of what I have observed, generally like the South Asian diaspora, again, like they try their level best to like bring their families, you know, adjust it over here. Uh, so I think that in terms of like economic impact, if families are also immigrating, that is also in long term it would have an economic cost, because if we have family back, then at least we'll be sending remittance. But if we bring everyone over here, then no need for sending remittance. So
Hmm.
if, as I was discussing earlier, if indeed it's a asset policy of Pakistani government, that would be also be redundant, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, sure. Like we say, people are migrating, grain drain for greener pastures, but the pastures are not always green, right? There is also a lot of cultural alienation, racism. I would say structural racism, especially. So, especially people coming from Muslim countries, and now especially in the aftermath of October 7, the world has totally changed. So, yeah, it's not easy. Like, I mean, I always say like migration. So in Urdu literature, we always say hijar ek alam hai.
Hmm.
So migration is basically a tragedy. No one wants.
Hmm.
I certainly, I would love to be there with you in
Hmm.
serving
Hmm. Oh,
South India, but uh, रोजगार के लिए करना पड़ता है पेट के लिए निकलना पड़ता है yeah
बिल्कुल ठीक है. That's the level above of it. Let me ask you one final question then, because we can
yes
gain from you on this. I'm sure that the Marxian literature has discussed this subject of
yeah
emigration, of migrant communities, of displacement, and of the exploitation of labor within the immigrant context or within this displacement. Can you speak summarily to what does the literature say about this? Does it condemn it? Is it neutral? What does it say?
thank you very much, Dr. Sir, for that wonderful follow final question. So the thing is that broadly in Marxism, I would say there are two broad strands from which we could analyze phenomena of migration. One is the point of view of imperialism, the other one is the point of view of dependency theory. So briefly, dependency theory posits that there has been a theory called modernization theory, which postulates that countries like Pakistan, we are stuck at the initial stages of development, and that where United States is, we will also reach there ultimately. Dependency theory theorists, they contest that. Like, no, countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, etc., they are not stuck at initial stage, but they have a very specific relational role in relation to the developed advanced countries, which is
Hmm.
they are providing sources of cheap raw materials, cheap labor, and other intermediate goods to the advanced countries, and in return they are importing capital intensive goods. So if you just look at the terms of trade, they're highly skewed in favor of the advanced countries and highly uh, they are unpropitious for global south countries. So
Mm,
what they say that value would transfer from global south countries to global north countries. Very very simple example if people could understand. There is something we call global labor arbitrage. So there is something in Islamabad called S&B 500. There is a company. So many of my class fellows are also from NASTA working over there. So they pay well. For example, from Pakistani standards, I don't know if, for example, they are paying someone an executive 5 lakhs, right? That person whom they are paying 5 lakhs, he or she is doing the same work and perhaps of even better quality than his or her colleague sitting in New York and taking $5,000 or maybe even more, no, not $5,000, $60,000 per month, $6,000 per 60,000 per year, $5,000 per
per
month for the
month.
same role. So
Mm,
that difference arising out of nationality, where one is born, this is how value transfers. And
mm,
Marx basically says this is why people migrate. So, like if you just ponder over it, why is it that the entire world, so just Donald Trump came to power, his second administration, one of the biggest issues, and I mean, just frankly driving me crazy, it's become such a nuisance, is that of immigration. So
yes.
one could ask, okay, why is it that everyone wants to come to United States of America? Sure, like it's an industrialized country and everything, but it has become rich at the cost of other global South countries as well. And when you displace and dispossess, when you bomb their homes,
Mm,
then of course those people would come to your country.
mm,
So this is like a broad perspective of imperialism, independency theory in Marxism, which explains why people migrate. Sure, China is also rising, but you would never see people migrating to China en masse. Sure, they are going for education and everything, but en masse, because
mm,
China is not imperialist, right?
mm,
It's doing its development for its own sake. It's not doing just to avariciously accumulate capital for the benefit and for the profit of capitalists while displacing
mm,
and dispossessing and bombing the hell out of people from other countries.
mm.
So that would be a Marxian perspective, a better Marxian perspective in my view.
Excellent. I think that's very valuable. That's something to think about. Our position in the map of dependency. Very
Yeah.
good. So, Hassan, I want to thank you for this chat. It's always a pleasure. I've always been very proud of you, and I want to see you continue to thrive. But as you had suggested, we will continue to have you as an ongoing guest, rotating through others and through your good offices. Inshallah, we will get some other interesting people who are in the same at the same wavelength as you are. Inshallah. So, thank you for this, and my best wishes are always with you.
My pleasure, Dr. Saab. And of course, it is going to be an ongoing thing. Thank you very much.